For decades, the French believed they'd discovered the secret formula for a perfect life after work. Retire early, live well, and never worry about the future. A nation where you could work fewer hours, take longer vacations, and still count on a pension that guaranteed dignity until the very end. But that dream is starting to crack. France, one of the richest countries in Europe, now finds its pension system on the brink. The numbers don't add up, the debts keep growing, and the trust that once held everything together is evaporating. The government calls it reform. The people call it theft. Streets filled with protesters. Unions shut down entire cities, and once again France finds itself at war, not with another country, but with itself. Because this fight isn't just about money, it's about what it means to live, to work, and to grow old with dignity. Today, we're talking about why France's pension system is breaking down. Let's see if France can save its most cherished social contract before it collapses. For generations, France has lived by a simple promise: work hard, retire with dignity. It's not just a policy, it's a part of the national identity. After all, in France, retirement isn't seen as the end of life's purpose. It's seen as the reward for a lifetime of effort. The dream was born in the ashes of World War II. The country was rebuilding, and along with roads and factories, it began rebuilding something deeper: trust in the future. The leaders of the new French Republic wanted to ensure that never again would aging workers fall into poverty after a lifetime of labour. So in 1945, they designed something revolutionary: a pay-as-you-go system, or répartition in French. That's how it works. It's beautifully simple. Every month, workers contribute a small portion of their salary. That money doesn't go into their own retirement fund, it goes directly to pay the pensions of those who have already retired. In return, when they grow old, the next generation of workers will do the same for them. It's a cycle of intergenerational solidarity and a kind of unwritten pact between young and old. Imagine it as a long human chain stretching across time. Each generation holds up the next, and for decades, that chain felt unbreakable. By the 1980s and 1990s, this model had become something close to sacred. Early retirement, once considered a privilege, became a right. In 1982, France officially lowered the retirement age to 60. It was a bold move and a declaration that life was meant to be lived, not just worked. People dreamed of their 60s as a time to travel, garden, enjoy grandchildren, or simply rest after decades on the assembly line. In a country famous for its long lunches and love of leisure, it felt like proof that social progress had triumphed. And for a long time, it worked brilliantly. France built one of the world's most generous pension systems. To put that in perspective, the French state spends around 14% of its entire economic output on pensions, which is nearly double the average among developed nations in the OECD. That's more than education, more than defence. Pensions are the single largest item in the French budget. But what did this generosity achieve? Something extraordinary. France managed to nearly eliminate poverty among its elderly. Today, only about 4% of French retirees live below the poverty line, compared to an average 13% across other rich countries. In other words, the system delivered exactly what it promised: stability and dignity in old age. When economists abroad looked at France, they saw a miracle of modern welfare, a country that had somehow combined compassion with consistency, creating a model that millions envied. For decades, the pension system was untouchable. It was a social contract written in trust, but trust, like any currency, can devalue over time. Even though the French pension model looked like an unshakable pillar of the welfare state, beneath its surface, cracks began to spread. Slowly at first, then faster. The math, once manageable, no longer works in France's favour. In the 1960s, France's population was younger, booming and optimistic. For every retiree, there was about 4 active workers paying into the system. That ratio, 4-to-1, made the répartition model sustainable. Inflow of contributions comfortably recovered the pensions being paid out. But France today is a very different country. Families are smaller, people live longer, and the workforce is aging. Now there are only about 1.5 active workers for every retiree. So imagine a single worker now supporting not just their own future, but 2/3 of someone else's retirement at the same time. The math doesn't leave much room for comfort. And this imbalance has one inevitable consequence. Fewer workers mean fewer contributions, and fewer contributions against guaranteed payouts means growing deficits over time. When the system was created in 1945, the French population pyramid was wide at the base, with many workers and few retirees. Today it looks more like a column, top-heavy even. More retirees are drawing benefits for longer periods, while the working age population stagnates. This demographic shift is at the heart of the problem. It's not that people suddenly became lazier or the economy stopped functioning. It's simply that the math of aging doesn't work the way it used to be. Life expectancy in France has risen by roughly 10 years since 1950. That's a good thing. It's a sign of prosperity, better healthcare and improved living standards. But for the pension system, it's a financial nightmare. To visualize it, in 1950, an average French man might live 5 years into retirement. Today, he might live over 20. Multiply that by millions, and the numbers swell quickly. France's Conseil d'orientation des retraites, or COR, the Independent Pension Advisory Council, projects that even after reforms, that deficit won't disappear. According to their most recent forecasts, by 2045, the system could be short by 30 billion euros each year, adding up to 470 billion euros to France's already heavy public debt. 470 billion euros is roughly equivalent to the entire annual GDPs of countries like Belgium or Argentina. It's a colossal amount, and it doesn't vanish. It becomes part of the bill that future generations will have to pay. The French government has tried to sound the alarm. Prime Minister François Bayrou had a blunt warning earlier this year. At this rate, we'll soon be unable to pay pensions. The system is running out of room to manoeuvre. Rising taxes would anger workers. Cutting benefits would spark protests. Doing nothing would lead to insolvency. So the country is trapped between demographic reality and political risk. A ticking clock that no one wants to touch, right? Emmanuel Macron became the next figure to strike directly at France's pension system. In 2023, after years of warning from economists and the country's audit office, Macron launched what he called a necessary modernisation. His plan was straightforward on paper, but explosive in practice. The legal retirement age would rise from 62 to 64, and the required contribution period, the number of years people must work to receive a full pension, would extend to 43 years by 2027. For Macron, this was an attempt to bring France in line with its European neighbours. Across the EU, the average retirement age sits at about 64.8 years, with some countries like Germany and the Netherlands already moving towards 66 or 67. France and Greece had the lowest threshold in the bloc. On paper, Macron's argument seemed reasonable. As we already mentioned, France was already spending nearly 14% of its GDP on pensions, nearly double the OECD average, and demographic forecasts showed that the imbalance between workers and retirees would only worsen. But the problem wasn't the math, it was the method. Macron's government forced the reform through without a parliamentary vote, invoking Article 49.3 of the French Constitution, a controversial clause that allows the executive to bypass the National Assembly. To many citizens, it felt like a political ambush. In a country where street protests are seen as a form of democracy, pushing through a deeply unpopular law without a vote crossed a red line. The reform was legal, but it was not legitimate. Within hours, demonstrations erupted across the country. What started as union marches grew quickly into a national revolt. Over the following months, millions took to the streets, from transport workers and teachers to nurses and students. Entire cities shut down. Trains stopped, flights were cancelled, and piles of uncollected garbage filled Paris as sanitation workers joined the strikes. The scene shocked the world. It wasn't just an economic debate anymore. It was a question of democracy, fairness, and trust. Polls showed that more than 60% of French citizens opposed the reforms, and Macron's approval ratings plunged to some of the lowest levels of his presidency. In interviews, protesters spoke with raw anger. Many said the reform symbolised betrayal, a government cutting into the very promise that defined modern France, that hard work would be rewarded with rest. To others, the law represented something even deeper, a shift away from solidarity toward cold arithmetic. France's pension system had always been built on the idea of collective duty. You work, you contribute, and you trust that others will do the same. Macron's reform, many felt, broke that social contract. It might have aligned France with Europe, but it also alienated its own people. Even Macron's allies admitted the damage was immense. His attempt to frame the reform as courageous and responsible fell flat amid images of tear gas and burning streets. The president, who once called himself neither of the left nor the right, suddenly looked isolated from both. Unions saw the reform as a symbol of arrogance, the government choosing financial logic over human reality. Opposition parties accused Macron of ignoring parliament and silencing debate. The left labelled him as the banker president, more interested in pleasing markets than protecting workers. Macron's administration defended the change as necessary, even inevitable. Ministers repeated that France could no longer afford to remain the exception in Europe. They insisted that without the reform, the system would collapse within decades. But for the public, it wasn't just about sustainability. People in physically demanding jobs like factory workers, nurses, and construction labourers argued that extending the working life to 64 didn't affect everyone equally. White-collar workers could adapt. Manual labourers often couldn't. And so what began as an economic measure turned into a national standoff. Macron won the legislative battle, but lost the moral one. His reform survived, but his popularity never recovered. By the end of that year, France had endured some of its largest strikes in half a century. Production slowed, tourism declined, and investor confidence wavered. France, once the model of post-war solidarity, was now a country divided over the meaning of work itself. Macron had set out to fix the numbers, to prove that discipline could save the system. But instead, he uncovered a deeper truth. No equation can balance if the public loses faith in the values behind it. Yet, the real irony, the math says Macron's reform still isn't enough, because despite the protests and political cost, the numbers continue to deteriorate. So let's look at why the 2023 reform failed to fix the deficit. At first, the reforms seemed to calm the markets and reassure Brussels, but behind the political drama, the numbers tell a quieter and a far more worrying story. According to France's Cour des Comptes, the country's independent audit office, even after Macron's changes, the pension deficit will more than double by 2045. Their projection shows that Macron's age hike from 62 to 64 only stabilised the system until 2030. After that, the red ink comes back. The reason is simple. By the 2030s, there'll be more retirees than ever before and fewer contributors paying in. Experts say that to truly balance the books, France would need to raise the retirement age to 65, which would save an estimated 17.7 billion euros a year. But in France, that number is political dynamite. After months of strikes and protests, even suggesting another age hike would be career suicide for any president. The deeper issue is structural. France's economy simply can't fund its promises anymore. There are too few contributors, stagnant wages, and persistent unemployment among young people. When less money flows in, but the state keeps paying out more, the gap inevitably grows. Yet cutting pensions remains politically untouchable. In early 2025, retirees even received a 5% pension increase, while active workers saw their taxes rise. For the younger generation, the message feels painfully clear. We pay more, retire later, and get less. But not everyone agrees that France's pension system is truly collapsing. A growing number of economists and demographers say the so-called crisis might actually be a political construction. Demographer Hervé Lebrun and economist Daniel Cohen are among the most outspoken voices challenging the official narrative. Their argument is simple: the deficit isn't the result of runaway costs, it's the result of government policy. According to Lebrun, the state has gradually reduced its own contributions to the pension system. Less public money goes in, so naturally the balance sheet looks worse. But that doesn't mean spending has exploded. In fact, the opposite is true. Pension spending as a share of GDP has stabilised, falling slightly from around 14% to 13.7% in recent years. If costs relative to the economy are stable, Lebrun argues, then the system isn't spiralling out of control. It's the state's withdrawal of resources that creates the illusion of crisis. And when you look at the demographics, the story becomes even more interesting. Yes, France's population is ageing, but the worst of the baby boom wave will pass by the mid-2030s. After that, the number of retirees is expected to plateau, or even slightly decline. Meanwhile, life expectancy growth is slowing. The French live longer than most Europeans, but gains that once added nearly 2 years per decade have now shrunk to just a few months. That means future retirees won't necessarily live decades longer than today's, easing long-term costs. Economist Daniel Cohen put it bluntly: resources are sufficient, there is no systemic crisis, the government created anxiety to justify cuts. So maybe the question isn't whether France's pension system is collapsing, but whether it's being politically restructured. A shift from a model of social solidarity to one driven by fiscal discipline. To understand why millions took to the streets, you have to understand what retirement really means in France. For most French workers, retirement isn't just an economic stage, it's about dignity. The moment when decades of hard work, long hours and high taxes finally give way to freedom. To them, retirement is not just a privilege, but a promise. The idea goes back to the post-war vision of work hard, retire with dignity. In a society known for its heavy taxation and relatively modest wages, that final chapter, the right to rest, feels like moral compensation. On social media, that feeling of betrayal turned into rage. Comments and posts flooded platforms calling the entire pension system a Ponzi scheme. People say they're paying into a system they'll never benefit from. The generational divide has never been sharper. The baby boomers retire with full benefits, long life expectancy and stable pensions, but younger workers face later retirements, smaller payouts and less security. The resentment runs deep. Many young French believe they are subsidising a system that no longer belongs to them, a social contract written by their grandparents and kept alive at their expense. And yet, even although there's anger, one thing remains true. Almost no one wants pensions to be cut. The current Prime Minister, Sébastien Lecornu, has read the political tea leaves and just recently suspended the implementation of Macron's reforms, delaying any increase in the retirement age until 2028 at the earliest. So what's next? Can the system survive another decade, or is France heading toward a generational reckoning? So where does France go from here, and what can the world learn from its turmoil? Prime Minister Barrot's 2025 emergency talks were supposed to offer a path forward. Instead, they ended the same way they began, in deadlock. Unions refused to bend, employers refused to pay, and the deficit kept widening as public trust kept collapsing. What's breaking isn't just the math, it's the model itself. France's great experiment in solidarity now faces its ultimate test: how to protect fairness without going bankrupt, and how to preserve security without crushing the next generation. Some economists say the answer lies in a hybrid system, one that blends pay-as-you-go solidarity with collective capitalization, ensuring that workers still support retirees but also invest in their own future. Others look to Sweden, where pensions automatically adjust to life expectancy and productivity, balancing stability with reality. Still others argue France must diversify how it funds retirement, not just through wages, but through taxes on capital, dividends, and corporate profits. But every solution carries a cost. Raise the age and you provoke protests. Cut pensions and you risk social collapse. Borrow more and you deepen the debt crisis. France is trapped between arithmetic and identity, between the numbers that must add up and values people refuse to give up. And yet, this is not just France's story. Across Europe, across the developed world, the same storm is gathering. Aging populations, shrinking workforces, and welfare systems built for a past that no longer exists. Every government faces the same impossible question: who pays, who waits, and who loses? Don't forget that, in the end, France's pension crisis isn't just about money. It's the belief that after a lifetime of labour, you earn dignity, rest, and a place in the story you helped build. But in a world drowning in debt, distrust, and political fatigue, even that promise is starting to fade. The system may survive a little longer, but the faith that built it, that's already breaking down.